Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the state of the individual. Returning to normal is a misnomer. So as we talked about in the description, this pandemic has really created a new environment and new realities for everyone. Self-isolation, financial, health, and social justice issues have created a new perspective on stress and taken a toll on our collective mental health. So today we're going to explore where we are, a discussion of our collective experience over the last year, where we're going, the editing process toward our new and uncertain future, and share some ideas on how we get there as we navigate the process of re-entry post-pandemic. We'll also share some tools that will be useful for optimizing your mental health and well-being. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. A couple years ago, I explored a certificate in the science of well-being and certainly recognized how important it became over the last year. So I'm happy today to be joined by two good friends who are also passionate and very knowledgeable about this topic. Please feel free to throw any questions in the Q&A box, and in the last 15 minutes, we'll address the questions. So right now I'd like to introduce Betsy Rippentrock Phd, a licensed psychologist and certified yoga teacher who uniquely blends science, psychology, and spirituality into her classes. She owns Heartland Yoga, maintains a psychology practice focused on integrating yoga into treatment, and has authored numerous academic papers on the mind-body connection. She's also the author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to the Chakras. Welcome, Betsy.
Thanks, Kate.
And Brad Baldwin. Brad is a 20-year service industry veteran, focusing on the principles of organizational strategy and leadership development. As the president of MediRev, Brad is a tireless advocate of the importance of building a company foundation with talented people who want to be part of a winning team. Brad is an advocate of mindfulness in the workplace and developing the connection between employee care and value creation within organizations. Welcome to Brad and both of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kate. Happy to be here today.
So let's begin with just acknowledging the collective experience we've all been through this past year. Certainly collective trauma and collective grief as a society. So Betsy, I'll start with you. How has this year and those things really affected us as individuals?
So it's an important question, and I think we can all take a collective sigh together because it's been a doozy of a year. So in the last year, I've had the opportunity, I kept my psychology practice going throughout this whole year. So it would come to no surprise that most of the topic we discussed with almost every single person was the pandemic and how they were being impacted. So I have the unique perspective to have had multiple conversations with many people from many walks of life about the pandemic. And then of course my own, I'm so human as well. So my own personal experience of what this last year has been like. So I think it's great, Kate and Brad, that we're going to sort of start with, let's lay out what were we all through? What did we all go through in this past year? So the first thing I noticed last April is intense anxiety. So lots of fear, lots of anxiety. We were so much at that point. I mean, we're still in the unknown. None of us really know how it's all going to play out in the end, but so much intense fear. I want to remind you all about the toilet paper hoarding that people were doing, right? It was such a sign of, I want to make sure I have enough. I remember going to the grocery store to Hy-Vee shortly after this had all come down, and the shelves were empty. And I remember feeling such fear in myself too, is there not going to be food anymore? What does this all mean? So I would say those first 3-4 months, tons of anxiety, a lot of sleep problems. So I'm guessing that many of you, myself included, experienced quite a bit of insomnia, challenges with sleep. So in addition to all the rumination and anxiety, as the months sort of rolled on and we realized okay, social distancing, we're in this for a little bit. What I started to see is that people began to cope, but not always in healthy ways. So it's what I call numbing out. So lots of overeating, people talk about they've gained 20 pounds during COVID, lots of drinking. So, even the alcohol sales skyrocketed during pandemic. So people knew that there they were feeling challenging things. And so they often turned to things that weren't necessarily the healthiest way to get through, but they were still ways to get through, obviously. So noticed a lot of that. And then, summer hit and we had the death of George Floyd. May he rest in peace. And really what was sort of brought up was all this deep-seated racism in our country. And so then I saw this layer of rage and anger start to come in. So we were already scared and in anxiety. Then we added in sort of rage and anger and grief over where our country was. And then fall arrived, right? So we got through this intense summer and then fall came and children didn't necessarily go back to school, or children were being schooled online. So I did kind of a broad view of the research in terms of mental health. And, the groups that were impacted the most, interestingly enough, were kids between the ages of 16 and 24. So that sort of late teen, early adolescent phase, they really struggled. And then women were the second group that seemed to struggle the most. So many women taking on the extra stress of childcare and homeschooling. So I was in this group for sure, in terms of trying to maintain a full entrepreneurial one-woman show business, plus homeschooling 3 children at 3 different grade levels. So the stress was high. So that was sort of fall. And then we brought in election season, right? So then there was more rage. And on top of that, what I saw so much in my practice is that people had different perspectives about COVID. Like some people were like, I'm social distancing, I'm wearing masks, I'm not traveling, I'm not going to restaurants. And other people had different perspectives. And so within families, within close friendships, within colleagues, like people that you've had deep connections with, there was sort of infighting and a lot of judgment about, well, they're not being careful, right? So this at a time when we want to be pulling together, there was just a lot of polarization all over the place. So now finally, where are we at today? There's more hope, right? There's immunizations coming out and people are feeling safer in terms of re-engaging. And that's really the point of our talk today. Like, what does a new normal look like? Is that even a possibility? Where are we all going? So I do want to share just 2 slides here. So I'm going to go into the share screen and pull this up really quickly here. So we do know that the blue on the left is pre-COVID. So 11% of the population had an anxiety or depressive disorder. Now, January 2021, so right in the midst of this COVID pandemic, that has jumped up so significantly. So I think what's important for all of you on this call, who I'm assuming are business owners or, in the public sector here, that you are going to face, or you're going to be in relationship to a lot of people that perhaps weren't depressed or anxious before, but have developed symptoms of this. You may even have that yourself because it's such a high percentage. But what the last point I want to make here is that mental health is a continuum. So on one end is depression, anxiety, and on the other end is this like flourishing, thriving human. But in the middle is a term called languishing. And there was a great article that just came out literally this week in the New York Times. And so I may add a link to it in the chat box for all of you. But a social scientist years ago created this term, this idea of languishing, which you're not in really great mental health, right? You're not really flourishing, but you're not necessarily showing signs of depression, but you're somewhere in the middle. And I kind of call it, it's like that bleh, just kind of bleh, right? You're not excited about anything. And there is some data done actually in the business world, which I think is fascinating. And mind you, this is data pre-COVID. So I think that's significant to know that really only about 40% of us are thriving or highly functional. The majority of people are languishing, right? And if you're languishing, which means you have lower motivation, it's harder to get yourself going, it's harder to initiate new things, your likelihood of developing depression or anxiety goes up. So I have no idea what this graph would look like post-COVID, but I think there's probably way more languishing and way more suffering as well. So these are all things for us to take into consideration as we do move, right, back into a world where, we're engaged more with people. So I guess I don't want to be the depressing voice right now, but I want to be the realistic voice, that this is the reality of what this last year has done to us. So now we have to, think about creative ways to be able to really move forward so more of us can actually flourish instead of either staying in that languishing mode or even moving towards a more depressive, anxious mode. So I'll turn it back to you, Kate, and then curious to hear what Brad has to say about more of the public world, the public sector in terms of jobs.
Yeah, Brad, let's talk about from a business perspective, kind of what the trajectory was and what it's looking like now. It's similar, I think, to what individuals went through. When you talk about the anxiety businesses felt, do we close? When do we close? But from your perspective, kind of what was that trauma like for workplaces and for businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Kate and Betsy. Wonderful comments. And you see on an individual basis, kind of that timing of how people have worked their way through the pandemic. Initially, a ton of anxiety related to uncertainty and this whole new world that happened pretty much overnight in March of last year. And then you layer on the social issues and the political issues, and over time that those individual characteristics and challenges have really manifested themselves organizationally as well. There's a couple of components that I'll tie to Betsy's perspective that were great. If you think about engagement of employees, and engagement is a great thing to charge at from an organizational standpoint, very different from satisfaction. You want engaged employees in your organization. And initially, when the pandemic set in, engagement increased. And one of the motivations or reasons for that is because organizations were required, because of the gravity of the issue, to really speak more transparently and to communicate more thoroughly than they maybe would in normal circumstances. And so we actually saw in the near term, from an organizational standpoint, of people in an organization coming together, engagement actually going up. That quickly dissipated as the longitudinal nature of the pandemic really sat in. And that's where you see this movement to this significant population of people that are either suffering or languishing. And as I'll also tie that to, from an engagement standpoint, as you think about that similar bell curve of highly engaged employees, not engaged employees, and then you've got this maybe larger population in the middle. That's also the portion of the organization that you can impact most directly through your activities to drive engagement. So as we think about some of the challenges because of all the layers of trauma that individuals have gone through over the last, call it 12 plus months, those people that are languishing because of those layered stressors in their individual life, those are also the people that we as an organization are most capable of impacting through some of the things that we can provide as employers. More acute perspective on mental health care, making sure we're providing resources along those lines. And so that individual experience that Betsy outlined so well, seeing how that has manifested organizationally, and then really understanding as an organization what you can do about that. And there's a lot that can be done to really support that suffering and languishing population.
That's very true. And there's certainly opportunities within this. And so when I think about how we've kind of been in a very solitary kind of state for a year as individuals, and every society values kind of collective grieving. And we haven't been able to really grieve collectively. We've had to do it kind of in silos, and everyone's in a different place along that continuum of kind of dealing with whatever losses they may have had over the year. And many people have had many losses. And so I think there's also this opportunity as we kind of come back together, whether in our workplaces, of that sensitivity to what have others experienced. And recognizing we may not know all that people have been through. And so I think to your point, Brad, this engagement piece and like, how do we kind of come back out of this or support one another in returning? Betsy, there's always, you're very good at saying when there's light and dark, they can exist, they can coexist, right? These things can happen simultaneously. So with this period of difficulty that we've all just been through, what are some of the benefits? What is some of the light? What are some of the benefits of coming out of this that we can look to individually?
It's such a good question. And I think there's so much benefit. The thing I've been most struck about is that this has been such a collective experience. It's the only time in, I think, any of our history of our entire life have we been in something where the whole world is going through it. Certain countries can be going through trauma or, natural disaster, but this was the entire planet. And so there's something significant about that this impacted all of us. So I do think it's the positive, the brightness, the benefit of all of this is it's such a chance for us to reset. Right. And what I noticed in all the clients that I worked with and myself, it was such a great opportunity to watch what rose up, right? To watch like, oh, wow, this isn't working, or, oh, wow, this relationship is challenging, or, oh, wow, having better work-life balance and working from home, this works for me, or this doesn't work for me. It was such an opportunity to actually slow down enough to do some self-awareness work if you chose to do that. Now, I know not everyone maybe chose to do that, but I think it's such a chance for us to reset. Like, what did we bring out of this? I know that there were as many positives as challenges for me, and this was the most challenging year to date for me, and yet so much benefit came from it. So I think that's where we have to focus, is like, this is a fresh start for all of us, in that languishing space, or in the yoga meditation tradition, we might call it the void space. This is where pure creativity and potential is, right? Like, out of sort of this space in the middle is where all new things arise from. So I just think creativity and forward thinking and new ways to work and new ways to engage, this is just going to blast open so many opportunities for creativity and movement forward. So I think it's exciting to see where this can take us. But I do think we have to also honor that we have to be kind and sensitive with ourselves and our employees, because it's been, excuse my language, a shit show for the last year. So a lot of people are still nursing some of the wounds of that, but the potential to come out of this and propel ourselves forward in new directions, I think it's the greatest time for that, for change, for new innovation.
And Brad, how can you see organizations and businesses tapping into that creativity of their employees, the opportunity for that autonomy to create new and move forward as organizations, just like we need to as individuals?
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I appreciate you asking it, Kate. I'll start with Betsy's comment of the shared experience and the fact that this was a very moderating experience. Unfortunately, that in the global pandemic, there wasn't an individual in our company that was unaffected. That creates a tremendous leveling that I think can be a spur for creativity and creating a new normal, even though that's not really going to happen. One of the things that I also think that the grave nature and the magnitude of the pandemic has done is it reminds me of an old movie called The Matrix, where there's two characters that are in the Matrix, and one is teaching the other, and they question, is that air you're breathing? And the point of that scene is that some rules are meant to be bent and some rules are meant to be broken. And this is creating an environment where there's an opportunity for many organizations in a way they've never had to start with a blank canvas in terms of reshaping their culture and how they want to work. The most obvious example of that organizations are dealing with, and there's lots of media coverage of this, or has been, is this idea of everybody's been working from home, mostly everybody. And now there's an opportunity to return to work, to a formal office environment. But the research says that 8 in 10 people don't want to return full time to an office setting. Most of them want to return on a part-time basis, but the prevalence of a hybrid model, and I think you would have seen, if you would have been able to survey people, organizations pre-pandemic, there would have been many, many organizations that would have said, we can't operate that way. We can't run our business without having all of our employees in a cubicle in our business, all 5 days a week. And what the pandemic has demonstrated is, yes, you can run your business differently. You can run your business with a hybrid staffing model where you have people that are sharing workspace. And so that's one specific example where organizations are going to be able to, if they want to, and this is the creative opportunity, completely rethink and reimagine how they're doing business, how they're serving customers, and how they're caring for their employees to enable them to bring their best self into serving their clients and taking care of their business.
And there's such an opportunity, like you said, for that change. There's also so many more opportunities remotely. So for the employee that may want to stay remote. And so really tapping into providing options for people. I think everyone's at a different place on the continuum. And I think that's the challenge for employers is kind of creating, like you said, either a hybrid model or a way to address that everyone's comfort level is at a different place perhaps. And how much flexibility, as an employer, do you have to accommodate that? I think I'm starting to sense it in conversations with employers. There's a shift happening. There are employees that are starting to step away from high stress jobs, looking for other opportunities coming out of this. And I think we all have to just recognize that's the reality we're going to see. It doesn't mean you're a bad company. It means it just may not be the right fit for someone after what they've been through. And I think it's hard as an employer to not maybe take that personally. But I just think that's kind of going to be the next big wave of change that's happening as people reevaluate their values, what they need for their families. This has obviously impacted women, as Betsy said, at a much higher percentage, and whether women will return to the workforce after this year of caring and primarily being home with school-age kids. And so it's going to be interesting to see kind of what rebounds and what moves around. I just think there's just going to be a lot of shifting happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to completely change the competition for labor because, the opportunities abound for businesses to rethink how they want to run their organization. It has also created a much more democratic opportunity for individuals who want to go to work for organizations. And again, the easiest idea to think about there is for most people and most jobs pre-pandemic, they were constrained in terms of their ability to work for companies by geography. Well, as you move to a much greater percentage of organizations that are comfortable with remote work, now Metarev, who operates in over 40 states today, but with concentration of our staff in just a few states, we now have the ability to recruit people in 50 states across the country and around the world. And so that competitive element of being able to employ people anywhere and really breaking that link between employment and geography is going to create a much more competitive environment where I believe employees are going to think about it. If you think about it from a sports analogy, all of the employees are going to be free agents to a much greater degree than they've been in the past. And so that's going to create a tremendous opportunity and force the hands of many organizations to really think differently about how they're motivating, how they're caring for their employees. Because the bottom line is, if I'm not treated well at my employer now, I may have limited options. I'm going to have many, many, many more options to go to work for somebody. Even though I sit in Iowa City, Iowa, I'm going to have more of an opportunity to go to work for somebody in Cheyenne, Wyoming, or in Phoenix, Arizona. And so that mobility of labor force, because of that break with geography, is really going to be an interesting dynamic that employers are going to have to respond to in a really thoughtful way in terms of how they care for their staff.
And Kate, I wanted to mention just something in general about change, because both you and Brad really brought up something interesting about there's such an opportunity for change. People may be rethinking their lives and sort of making different choices based on this last year. And from a behavioral perspective, change is really hard. Like, everyone resists it, right? So our brains are actually wired towards something called the negativity bias, meaning that we overestimate threat and underestimate opportunity and potential, right? And it's an evolutionary thing. Our brain develops this way to keep us safe and to keep us alive. But in general, the average human resists change. Of course, there are people that thrive on it, but people are fearful of change, which is why so many people get stuck in long-term jobs that don't serve them. And yet I do think this whole past year we were all forced to change, right? Every single person was forced out of their regular routine. So in some ways, it gave us all this experience of doing it differently, which again, I think is a huge benefit. It's shown people that, oh, I did change in this last year, and I can take that moving forward and make different choices that may serve me better. So it's going to be so interesting to see where this goes, but I hope people do feel more motivated to make those healthy changes.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about, Betsy, there's definitely, as people are on the continuum of kind of embracing the, some return to normalcy, or at least the idea that I'm going to go back and I'm going to maybe be at the office now 2 days a week. Everybody's on a little bit different comfort level there. How would you suggest people manage that anxiety of kind of returning or exploring, what am I ready for? What's the right time for me to make that choice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first piece is to look yourself in the mirror and have an honest discussion with yourself about the ramifications of what this pandemic did to you, right? Like, really ask yourself, am I drinking more than I need to be drinking right now because it's been a really hard year? Or am I in a dead-end job that I hate? Or do I realize that I'd rather be spending more time with my children and actually homeschool them again next year? I mean, I think we've all been through something that stirred up things. And so I think the first thing is people have to take an honest look at their lives and really figure out what this past year has meant and what they want to take from it in terms of moving forward. But the thing is that we sometimes forget, especially if we tend to be in the languishing or even the flourishing, is that we can ask for help. This is another human thing that people really struggle with. It's like we sort of believe, I got it all figured out, our good Midwest values of like, I'll just pull myself up by the bootstraps and make it work. And, the research shows time and time again, in fact, that languishing slide that I showed you, it was in relationship to a 20 billion tech firm that they started to see that they had so many languishing employees. And so they took their managers and they offered them coaching to learn how to work with creativity and to learn how to work with themselves and to understand how they communicated and where they were stuck. And within 4 months, that company showed higher resiliency across the board, right? Higher purpose. People had better mental well-being. So that's the thing. I mean, I'm in the business of helping people, and I know it's possible that people don't have to languish for the rest of their lives, or people don't have to live with anxiety and depression. These are treatable conditions, but it takes us taking the step to say, oh, I am going to call that therapist, or I am going to sign up with that coach, or I am going to take that meditation class, or I am, it takes us, moving forward and realizing like, I don't have to have it all figured out. There are people out there, I've spent my entire career learning how to help people move forward and flourish in their lives. And so there are people out there that can help you and guide you. You don't have to have it all figured out, but you do have to look in the mirror first and foremost and sort of know, where am I at? How has this impacted me?
Absolutely. And Brad, what about leaders of organizations, managers, leaders that have people that they're serving in organizations? How do leaders do self-care so they can care for others right now? Because I think they also have to model that self-care if we want to expect our employees to have the freedom to do that too.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, Kate, and I think what Betsy said is exactly right. You know, I think looking at yourself in the mirror really openly and honestly, and then projecting as a leader vulnerability, that, you know, it's okay to not be okay, and to demonstrate that. And that's certainly something that, you know, I've been very fortunate to be part of an organization at MetaRev where we take ideas around vulnerability very seriously. That's something we've always done as leaders, and it makes a pretty meaningful difference. And so I think that looking in the mirror is really important as a leader. I also think that's really important as an organization. And I wanted to touch on one element of that. You know, as we look at reentry and reentry to something that didn't look like it did a year ago, the competitive factors in our industry look different for most businesses. What our employees think about and what matters to them because of the experience as individuals that they've gone through is completely different. And so what does re-entry mean? And maybe what does that mean when we don't know exactly what we're all re-entering into? And as I think about that, there's a concept that I think is maybe applicable here for anybody that's worked in international settings where they've had expatriates. So expatriation means they're taking an employee from the United States, let's say, for example, and they're sending them to do a 2-year stint in another country, in Italy, or, you know, wherever it happens to be. In that process, it's very common to be very focused on that expatriate, taking that individual and putting them in a position to be successful, not only in the work that's they're being asked to do, but there's a ready recognition that you are pulling them from one culture that they're used to, and you're putting them in another culture that they're not accustomed to. And you need to help them through that process. What is sometimes lost in that expatriate experience is that when they spend 2 years immersed in that culture, they also need to repatriate. And even though they grew up in that example in the United States and they've only spent 2 years in Great Britain, that repatriation process can often be as difficult as leaving in the first place. So think about that in the context of this global pandemic. We are re-entering a space that is different than it was before, but regardless of to what degree it's similar or different than it was before, we've not been in that environment in a long time, in over a year. And maybe it'll be 18 months or 2 years for some people. So as organizations, we have a tremendous opportunity in terms of caring for our staff, and a tremendous obligation, I believe, as well, to make sure we're repatriating them into whatever that workspace, that work environment that we're asking them to come into and perform into. We're really thoughtful about that, what that environment looks like for them and how it's different, and helping them through that. So one really specific example of that as it relates to maybe hybrid work or remote work, there is, and I would encourage everybody to Google it, and if you do, there's voluminous information about it, and it's Zoom fatigue. So when you've gone from working in an office to having 8 to 10 hours of meeting on Zoom, the fatigue level of an individual on Zoom meetings is much higher than in-person meetings. So what do you need to do and shift in terms of your organization to accommodate for that? Because maybe putting somebody in 8 to 10 hours of meetings a few days a week made sense on an in-person basis, and that individual could handle it. That might not work in this repatriated new environment where more of that is done on a Zoom basis. And the organizations that win, the organizations that attract people, keep people, are the ones, in my opinion, that will be very thoughtful about that repatriation process and how they can do that in a way that serves the employees, to put them in a position to be successful in this new culture that they're not familiar with, so that they can be comfortable there and really focused on serving their clients and taking care of the business.
Yeah, I love that idea of really understanding and responding to the individual experience. I think that you have to be vulnerable as a leader to do that. Sometimes you have to, be open to and be creative when you are willing to really focus on the individuals. But there's huge payback I believe in doing that, because it develops that trust and understanding. And I think ultimately, we all need that comfort, right? We need it anyway, but especially right now as we return or think about coming back into an organization. Do I trust this organization has my best interest at heart? And to me, it's a really key piece moving forward. Let's move into kind of what tools can we use during this time to really increase our well-being. The science of well-being says there's three main pillars: gratitude, social connection, and mindfulness. And so I try to think of those three things daily. What have I done in those three areas? But this pandemic has really challenged us in those areas. When you think about it, we've been very isolated, and if social connection is a pillar of well-being, that was very challenging and difficult. Gratitude, I think we all kind of pared our lives down and really decided what was most important to us. And so, I think there has been an opportunity to be grateful for smaller things during this time. And then mindfulness, I think it was very hard, I know for me personally, to really live in the moment when there was so much noise and so much fear and so many things to worry about. Is this going to be over by November? Will it be over in January? Will we have a vaccination we've all been looking out for these. It's been challenging, I think, to just be in the moment because there's been all of this noise, like I said. So how have either of you really worked these things into your everyday life? And do you see these as a good way forward as we move into that space?
Do you want to go first, Brad?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Betsy. Thank you. So I guess I'll comment on two of them: social connection and mindfulness. So from a social connection standpoint, I would go back to this increased prevalence to lean on Zoom. And one of the things, that we were seeing in our society anyway was increasingly this drive to go get social connection through social media, and the downsides of doing that in terms of diversity of thought, and you can put yourself in an echo chamber pretty quickly. You can find people that only think what you think, and some of those stressors of diversity and who you're interacting with are really helpful in terms of maintaining some balance as an individual. So then the pandemic lands, and maybe that dependence on social media as a source of social connection is heightened even more. So I think understanding those components and how you can, when you're coming back into a repatriated future post-pandemic, how can you create social connection? So from an organizational standpoint, I talked about, if you're going to have a geographically agnostic workforce, and now you're recruiting people all across the country, how do you build a culture? How do you create social connections despite the fact that everybody's not going to be in the same building or the same office? And that's a new challenge. There are certainly ways to create that social connection, but it takes a level of thoughtfulness and commitment on behalf of organizations to do that. And I would just really encourage organizations to be thoughtful about how they can create that in this new environment. From a mindfulness standpoint, this is a topic that's pretty dear to me. I was fortunate to have another executive leader at MetaRev a few years ago that had a personal practice and was committed to mindfulness personally, and her and I teamed up to bring some of the ideas of mindfulness into MetaRev. And I think over the last few years, as we've continued to saturate our organization with those concepts, maybe what we learned along the way is we had really built an organization and a culture for a long, long time at MetaRev that was around idea of vulnerability, around kindness, around compassion, around mutual respect. And some of those elements really, while we didn't put them under this title, those are really mindful ideals that we brought into our organization and we live with as an organization every day. We've continued to amplify that message and maybe organize it a little bit better as we've continued to grow organizationally, but that has just yielded tremendous benefits for us organizationally in terms of trust with our employee population, making sure that we are attentive to caring for their needs, and the engagement that we have from our employees as a result of making sure that we're nurturing their self-interest. And so, you know, that's something that the mindfulness piece is really critical. It's certainly been critical to the success of our organization at MetaRev. And I think we're a great business case. I think so often business leaders think that it's a binary choice, that they need to choose between caring best interest of their employees and value creation for the organization. And they're not mutually exclusive. That you can have, as a business leader, as a business owner, you can have your cake and you can eat it too. You can make sure that you operate in the best interest of your employees and you can maximize the value for your shareholders. And anybody that's out there telling you as a business leader or a business owner that you can't do that is not giving you the full story. Is it the harder thing to do? Of course it's harder. If you want your cake and eat it too, it's harder to do that. But those opportunities are there to both create value as a fiduciary steward of your organization and to make sure you're doing so in a way that really maximizes and focuses on the experience that employees are having in your institution. And so I would really encourage people to look at mindfulness ideals and use that as a springboard to be able to get your cake and eat it too.
Thanks, Brad. That great points all around. So Betsy, from your standpoint, of those three tools, they're obviously all important, but where can individuals kind of start with these tools, and how can you build them into kind of your life in a way that you'll really make an impact?
Yeah, so I'll start with gratitude. As anything, it's a practice. So, you know, our brains don't, again, we have a negativity bias. We don't naturally go towards looking at what's good. We have to train ourselves to do that. So, you know, I know everyone out there has probably heard, write down 3 things every day that you're grateful for. Well, the research supports it. People who engage in regular gratitude practice have less depression and have less anxiety. So we know that it's a powerful practice, and it can be quite simplistic. It can be just before you fall asleep at night, you review your day, you think about 3 things that you're grateful for. And we know this does create sort of a buffer in terms of your mental health. Social connection, it's long been known in the mental health literature that if someone's depressed, what do? You need to get them connected to other people. Depression is sort of a turning in, like a, you know, going inward, sort of disconnecting from society. So as it seems like a no-brainer, but it's very hard if you're pulled in to connect, but it's key. It's absolutely key. Sorry, am I, sorry, I was echoing a little bit there. I didn't want to, but it sounds like it's better. But last but not least, let me talk about meditation mindfulness, because I do feel like it's so powerful. It can be such a shift for people, and the benefits from mindfulness and meditation show up. And again, research wise, because I'm a data head around all of this, show up in as little as 2 weeks. So people who start a mindfulness practice, you see benefits and changes in their brains in as quick as 2 weeks. So it doesn't take a huge investment of, I have to meditate for a year to see benefit. It happens very, very, very quickly. And I always say that if Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer could figure out how to put in pill form all the benefits that come from meditation mindfulness, they would be killing it, right? Like they would be making so much money. The challenge is that we have to do it, right? It takes a little bit more than just, you know, taking a pill. There's some effort behind it. There's a commitment to yourself every day for 15 minutes. But I do want to, because I believe in the data. And actually, I believe that like when we see the data, we start to, you know, believe in it a little bit more. There's about 20 years of data now around mindfulness. And when I say mindfulness, there's many definitions of mindfulness. Mindfulness can be, I'm here in the present moment, completely aware of the here and now. Mindfulness is also a meditation form of practice, but all the data is showing that it not only helps us physiologically, our blood pressure goes down, our immune system gets stronger. I mean, in pandemic times, we don't know how long pandemic times are going to go on. We want as robust of immune system as possible. And there's such good data that a daily mindfulness meditation practice completely boosts immunity. There's also brain changes that happen. It is anti-aging. So there's a protein at the end of our chromosomes called telomere. And as brief, I think, as 6 to 8 weeks, people's telomeres begin to strengthen, which means they age at a slower rate. So in addition, anxiety, sleep quality, stress, all of this gets improved when we commit to a mindfulness practice. And we put together all kinds of resources. I do recommend that if you want to move forward on a daily meditation or mindfulness practice, I think having a teacher is awesome because you will inevitably run into questions. What I hear from people all the time is, I think I'm doing it wrong because my mind doesn't stop thinking. And I always tell people, your mind will never stop thinking. Your brain is designed to create thoughts. So if you think meditation mindfulness is the absence of thought, you'll never slow your mind down or stop your mind. Your mind is always going to be producing thought. You learn how not to attach to it in the same way or follow the storyline of it. So I do recommend finding a teacher, and I am starting a meditation class 1 week from tonight. I teach meditation regularly, so if any of you are interested, I'll put it in the chat. But there are also great apps. I really like the Headspace app. There's a 10% Happier app that I know Brad really likes. Insight Timer app is another one. These tend to be either free apps or a pretty low investment to start some kind of a mindfulness meditation practice. There are, lots of resources out there online, tons of YouTube videos. But I do want you all to know the power of it. Brad, would you speak for a moment? We've had some great conversations, and I think you're such a great example of someone who is such a proponent of it and has clearly seen how not only has it positively impacted your personal life, but your life as a leader and your life as a business owner. I mean, would you speak just for a couple of moments about what it's done for you?
Yeah, absolutely, Betsy. Thank you. And I was going to jump in if you didn't ask me to, so very kind of you to do so. But those individual things that Betsy's talking about, I would encourage business leaders not to think for one moment that those can't be brought into an organizational context. One of the things that has been pretty impactful for me personally in terms of mindfulness, and there's a narrative arc of reading that I went through in terms of first starting with kind of physical training, and I've done endurance training for many, many years, and trying to optimize for physical fitness for endurance training. And as I started to do more and more research, one of the things that became very clear to me is that we are we're very far advanced in terms of maximizing our physical potential for performance. And it's easiest to see that in an athletic context, but it's not exclusive to that. However, we have just untapped potential. And I believe pretty strongly that the next great performance leap for us as a society is really by bringing the ideas and commitment around physical training and bringing that into a mental training context. So, we can't raise hands here, but I want everybody to think that's on this call, how many of you have a home gym or a treadmill or a gym membership or a personal trainer? And I think probably in some context, most of you, if not all of you, would raise your hand if we were in a room together. How many of you have a mental coach? What Betsy said. We've got one. But I'll bet if we were in that room and we asked you all to raise your hands, there's going to be very, very few people. And so I would just submit, whether it's using mindfulness, meditation, or similar topics, the next great performance leap that is available to you and available to your employees is through mental training and mental care. And that's one of the things that I think I want to close with from my perspective is people think a lot of times of mindfulness and some of the important work that Betsy does every day is a break fix model. So, hey, I'm broken and I need to go get Betsy's help and I need to get fixed. And so I call that kind of the red light mindset. And certainly there are applications for mindfulness in a red light mindset where there's some trauma, there's some really challenging difficulties, and I need help with that. But I think there's as much opportunity in what I would call the yellow light or the green light opportunities as well. The yellow light is exactly what Betsy introduced to us a little bit earlier, which is a large languishing population that's not inspired, that's not committed. And there's an opportunity to really engage that population and let them take that next step forward. And then you see on the green light standpoint, high performance focus and the recognition that there's a tremendous opportunity to continue to make that next competitive jump through mental training and mental optimization. And so an easy place, again, I'm a sports person, so I tend to go to those analogies, but it's not a coincidence that you're starting to see professional athletes speak out about mental care and mental challenges. It's not a coincidence that when you see a call map on YouTube TV, that you see LeBron James, arguably the best professional basketball player on the planet today. And so if you pay attention, you will identify mindfulness concepts and really, really connected with performance optimization. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity for us as individuals, as leaders, but also to be able to bring those ideas to support the health and well-being of our employee population.
I'll just throw out at our organization in the kind of the heat of the pandemic, the really challenging times, someone from our team, we started a mindful moment, and every day at 2:30 you could jump on Zoom and meditate. We were all apart, but there is a sense that you are together when you're in that moment. So there are ways to do this in an organization, big or small, where people can opt in. You just have to create an opportunity for them to try it and to see if it works for them. So Betsy, I want to get one question in, and then we're going to end the session just with an exercise with Betsy to kind of have us all leaving on a calm note. So the question is, are there strategies specific to industries? And this person's really thinking about our healthcare workers and being a manager of our healthcare teams that have been through so much trauma this year. Caregivers, are there specific strategies or things that you can think of that could be really useful?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I live with a healthcare worker, so I understand the stress of what this last year has meant. And so again, I think, and Brad alluded to this earlier, that probably a lot of people on this call are caregivers, right? They're leaders, they're caregiving, they're a flock of employees or their flock of patients. And we so often, and caregivers tend to be very stalwart, right? Like they can take on a lot. They sort of hunker down and make things happen. And so I think so much of it is an acknowledgement of our own humanity, that even leaders and doctors and healthcare workers, we need self-care. We need breaks. We need to be cared for ourselves. So I guess it's hard to give a blanket statement of, yeah, here's the intervention, but I think it's more going to your group and having honest conversation about, look, guys, right? Like this has been a heavy year. Not only are you a leader and a caregiver, but you're working with people who've really had heavy years. And so what do you need? And if they say, oh, no, I'm fine, you call BS on that, because we're all humans and we all need time away. We all need silence. That's why I think developing even a 5 to 10 minute meditation practice a day is such a balm, because we know after 7 minutes of sitting in meditation, rumination stops. So we all ruminate, right? We all spin on a problem or a challenge. And just by sitting with yourself in silence and meditation for 7 minutes, you break that cycle. So the benefit of that is profound. It's profound. So, if you have a group of people, this question of healthcare workers, can you encourage a group meditation, or can you have a coach or a therapist or, a speaker come in and give a half a day of self-care time? So often we sort of say, oh yes, self-care, I'm fine, I don't need that. But we actually all need it. And especially if you're in a leadership position, it's like you cannot skimp on that. There's a famous study of Dr. Deepak Chopra did this, of 3 people in a room, and he physiologically measured their heart rate and their stress, basically how was stress manifesting in their body. And the person in the room, so they couldn't talk to each other, they couldn't look on their phone, they just had to sit there for 20 minutes. And what happened is the person who was most calm, most steadfast, most settled in themselves, the other 2 people's brains and physiology totally entrained or lined up with that calm person. So the calmest person in the room is the most powerful person in the room. So if you are a leader, in some ways, it is like incumbent upon you, right, to work with yourself, like Brad said, work with your mindset, work with your physiology, so that wherever you are in that calm state, knowing that without even other people knowing it in your environment, they are in training or lining up with you. So if you're in a really steadfast, calm state, it benefits everyone, right? So, I could talk for hours on meditation, but I'm not going to, unless you take my course next week, and then we'll talk for hours about meditation. But Kate, I know you wanted me to end with just like a taste, unless there's any other questions, like a 2-minute, just sort of settling in, taste of what mindfulness is. Is there anything else, Kate?
No, but I just want to thank both of you for being on today, for having this conversation together. I think there's huge benefit and power in what we've talked about, no matter the industry, in schools, for teachers, for kids right now who have gone through a lot too. And so I hope the tools we talked about today you can think about different people and ways in your own lives that you can deploy them, because we all need to lean on each other for strategies kind of as we move into this next realm. So thank you both. But yes, I'll turn it over to you, Betsy, and you can close us out with our meditation.
And Betsy, before you start, I'll just say to everybody, thank you, Kate, for having us here. And to that end, if I can be a resource for anybody that's joined us today, I'm pretty easy to find. And if you can't find me, Kate certainly knows how to. So if I can be of service and help anybody with any further conversation, I'm certainly willing to avail myself to any and all of you as it makes sense for you. So thanks for having us today, Kate.
Thank you.
So I want to encourage all of you to give yourself the gift of these next 2 minutes and to know that you can't do this wrong. So that's often a thing we get stuck in, is that I can't meditate. My mind is too busy. I can't do it. You can't get it wrong. Like, there's no bad meditation. Every meditation is beneficial. So I encourage you to find a tall seat. So instead of sort of leaning back in your chair, maybe scoot towards the front of your chair so that you can get a nice long upright spine. This is a really key aspect. And then take a nice deep breath in. And as you exhale, close your eyes and just simply feel your attention and your awareness move inward. So instead of our focus being on the external world and the world of work and challenges and stressors, we take a moment just to focus inward. And yet, if we just focus inward and allow the mind to spin off, it can sometimes feel more overwhelming or stressful. So today I'd like to just use our body as a source of groundedness and a place for us to draw our attention. So feel your focus. It's almost like you're honed in, like you have a flashlight, and that flashlight is shining all the way down into your feet. And just pay attention. Notice What's your feet feel like? The temperature of your feet, the sensation of shoes or socks on your feet. And just notice by bringing your attention here that the feet can actually start to soften a bit. And as the feet stay in a slightly more relaxed state, feel your attention. We're all quite learned at focusing attention. Feel your attention stay in your body as you move your awareness up through your ankles, up through your knees, settling into your pelvis. I'm assuming most of us are sitting in a chair right now. And so can you allow the support of the chair to come up and meet you so that the pelvis can actually let go a little bit? When we're in a high state of control and perfectionism and getting it right, we unconsciously start to clench our pelvis and our buttocks. So what if you curiously stayed in the pelvis for a moment more and observed if you could just allow the whole pelvis to become a bit more heavy and relaxed? As you stay with awareness in the body, feel your attention now move up the spine, moving up through the lumbar spine, the thoracic spine, all the way up to your upper back, your chest, allowing your shoulders to release down away from your ears. Perhaps during this pandemic, you've felt like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Let your shoulders begin to soften and relax, even if just momentarily. Awareness now moving up into your face as your jaw releases, unclenching the jaw. You might feel your teeth part slightly. And if your tongue is sort of plastered to the roof of the mouth, which it often is if we're stressed, allow the tongue to soften down away from the roof of the mouth. Forehead relaxed, temples soft. Whole body much more in a place of relaxation and ease. And take a nice deep breath in. As you exhale, gently blink your eyes open. It's as easy as that. Moving into your day a little more refreshed, more clear, and definitely more grounded in your body. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.